Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity to present our work here. First, I want to stress that this is work in collaboration with Jackie Meisel, Victoria Espinoza, Karen Jeff, Karen Dylan Taylor. And Jackie actually is presenting 2 posters and giving a short presentation as well at the meeting. So you may find her virtually at ISMB. So first, I wanted to give a little bit of background, and I apologize for those of you who know genome assembly very well already. But the way we uncovered the genomes of organisms is by taking the DNA from each cell, breaking it apart, shoving it into an instrument that we call a genome sequencer. And it is this instrument that now takes the pieces of DNA, reads the string of letters contained in them, the A, C, G's, T's, and then the resulting strings of letters go into a computational algorithm called the genome assembler to reconstruct the genome we started with. So this is a fairly complex process. A very useful metaphor for understanding how genome assembly works is to imagine the situation where you have a collection of books, pass them through a paper shredder, and then you use a computer to reconstruct the original text. And you have probably seen this on TV. If you watch CSI, they do this all the time, and it works perfectly every time. So why are we focusing on genome assembly beyond the fact that this is one of the research areas in my lab? I would say genome assembly is really one of the fundamental problems in computational biology, and it is due to genome assembly that now we have hundreds of thousands of genomes that have already been sequenced. I also think that genome assembly is one of the first demonstrations that computational sciences can overcome limitations in experimental approaches. So essentially biology plus CS, or biology and CS together is greater than biology plus CS, or what you'd expect. The second reason why we chose genome assembly is that using metaphors like the paper shredder is very easy to grasp the intuition behind the problem that we're trying to solve. A third argument for genome assembly is that it actually is a fairly complex computational problem. There are many different algorithmic ideas that are contained in solving genome assembly. And as such, we can tailor the education experience to the level of interest or to the level of experience of our audience. So it's very easy to go to elementary school kids and have a lesson plan that works for them, and also have a much more advanced lesson plan, for example, for undergraduate students. And finally, a lot of times the students I run into are students who want to learn more about computer science, not necessarily about biology, but I use genome assembly as an opportunity to get the students interested in biological problems. The examples that I'm going to show you today, we have piloted them in 2 different settings. We would have done this again this year, but it hasn't worked out because of the pandemic. The first is Maryland Days. It's a large event that happens on the campus of the University of Maryland every spring, and it brings probably several tens of thousands of people from the local region come to see exhibits on science and have fun for a day on our campus. The second event are summer camps that our computer science department is organizing every summer. And these are camps that were primarily targeted at increasing the participation of women and students from underrepresented groups in computer science. And they now span from roughly 4th grade all the way through high school students. So it's a great opportunity for us to reach a broad range of students. So the setup for this educational experience that we're putting together is very similar to magnetic poetry. So essentially, we have we start with a magnetic whiteboard, like you see on the screen, and on it are small magnets with different pieces of a phrase put on them. And the hope is that now students or participants in visiting the University of Maryland will now move the magnets around and try to figure out what the original phrase was. You can easily recognize if you just look at this, it is the beginning of The Tale of Two Cities by Dickens. Our hope is that students will take a piece. For example, here I chose was the best of. and then try to see which other pieces fit with them. So by fit, I mean here each fragment contains 4 different words, and I'd say the 2 pieces fit well if they share 3 different words, because this allows me to learn more about the phrase. So I can find out that from this sequence, the text probably contains was the best of times, and so on, and eventually I can reconstruct a small piece of my original fragment, of my original text. The ultimate goal is, of course, to reconstruct the whole text. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. This text in particular, and the reason we chose it, is that it actually is quite tricky, and you can easily reconstruct a text that's not correct. It's also probably a text that many students, especially at the elementary school level, would not know, so they wouldn't know what the correct answer is. So at the bottom, I'm showing you a different text constructed from the same set of magnets that says it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the best of times, it was the age of foolishness. So it is perfectly correct grammatically, however, it is not what Dickens wrote originally. And the reason you can do this is because there's this short string, it was the, and you can see highlighted on the screen. And this short string is repeated many times in this text. And as a result, it's very easy to kind of rearrange the words around it and reconstruct incorrect text. At that point, this creates an opportunity for additional discussion with the students. And what I do, I would show them on a different way of solving the puzzle would be to take the pieces, put them on the board and start drawing arrows between them if they overlap. So you see on the screen, it was the best and was the best of overlap because they share those 3 words. As you do this drawing, you will realize once you get again to this string of it was the, you realize that you have 3 choices. You can go to it was the best, it was the worst, or it was the age. So essentially at that point you are stuck not knowing what the correct answer is. At this point, it opens up the opportunity to also bring up the full graph for the text. As you see on the screen, it's a lot more complicated. And one way of thinking about solving this, this graph is to say, well, let's start traversing it, but we really have to use our magnets. We can't simply skip any of the magnets. So reconstruction will follow a path that goes this way. So it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, and then it was the age of foolishness, and then I finished the text. At this point, as I drew it here, and excuse the little bumps that my computer screen is making, but as I drew it here, I never lifted the pen off the paper. So this is a great entry into providing the students with this other set of puzzles where you are given a picture and asked, draw this picture without lifting the pen off the paper and without drawing over the same line twice. At this point in a classroom setting, I would provide students with pieces of paper that contain different puzzles, some of them that can be solved, some of them that cannot be solved, and allow them some time to play with those puzzles and see which ones they can solve. At the end, we have a dialogue about could you solve the puzzle, why could you not solve certain puzzles, and then try to explain the concept of Eulerian graphs, which are the graphs that allow a solution to essentially where you can actually draw them without lifting the pen off the paper. And in that case, the necessary and sufficient condition is that every node in the graph has an even degree. And this is something that even I've worked with students in 4th grade, and they had no difficulty doing this and engaging with the puzzles. Now we have 2 different settings for that I've described as Maryland Day, where we're dealing with people from the general public just stopping by a booth, and the second setting was the summer camp. When we set up this this activity at Maryland Day, What we started with was a short video describing the problem and describing how you might want to reconstruct the wording. And then each individual participant will now take the magnetic whiteboard and the magnets and try to solve it. And then, of course, ask questions if they got stuck. So it's pretty much an independent thing, and people quite enjoyed that particular experience. In the summer camp settings, we can do a lot more. Usually structured this around about an hour of work with the students. So typically start with the discussion about biology and about sequencing, because I'm personally interested in metagenomics, just like Philip. I would also introduce ideas about metagenomics, and I'll come back to that at the end briefly. Then we would pass the magnetic boards with the words on them, or with the magnets on them, to groups of students organized usually around the table, and allow each of the groups to solve the puzzle. After some period of time, whether or not they solve the puzzle, then we'd go into a discussion about why different puzzles are more difficult than others. So in our case, we would have some students that have more complicated puzzles, either different phrases or different magnets. And I'll show you in a second what I mean by that. And then I would also have this discussion about Eulerian graphs, provide out the paper, and then have a discussion about which puzzles in the Eulerian graph worked and didn't for them. So these variants that we can do with the wording include, for example, changing the fragment size. So I have a situation on the left where I have the fragments having only 3 words in them. And that's a more challenging situation because it is not just that it was that becomes a repeat, if you will, but also it was and was the also become repeats because now we only require fragments to share 2 words. Or we can make easier puzzles where we, for example, go to 5 words, and at which point it becomes much easier to solve the puzzle without actually, it actually becomes impossible for us to come up with an incorrect reconstruction of it. We can also play with other phrases. So we have tried the one on top: if you always do what you have always done, you will always get what you have always got. And also at the bottom is a quote from Martin Luther King that also contains this structure of repetitiveness structure that makes assembly difficult, and that becomes interesting for education. And I'm still looking for other phrases that we could possibly use in this setting. One thing that happened as we played with these education experiences, particularly with the summer camp, we realized that introducing, allowing groups to work on problems opened up an opportunity to talk about parallel computing. So you always take advantage of introducing various concepts, both related to computing and related to computational biology. So one observation is that while individual students might be able to solve the puzzle fairly quickly, once they work in a group, it actually takes them a lot longer to do it. And then had a brief discussion with them about how communication, while it's useful to help you solve the puzzle, it actually slows you down. And that's a problem also common in parallel computing. The other observation that I make is that the whole class together solves the problem as quickly as the fastest group. So as soon as one student group finishes the problem, then the whole class has essentially solved it, assuming the whole class gets the same problem. So that's another one of the strategies used to speed up computation through parallel computing. And I think that's how a lot of cloud computing actually operates currently. There are a couple of surprising things that I've learned doing this experience, and I'm still trying to figure out how to change it, and also how to move to an online setting, for example, using a virtual magnetic board. I haven't yet found a good solution, but if anyone would like to help me work on that and come up with an HTML5 or a JavaScript solution, that'd be great. I've been teaching students, undergraduate students, for over 15 years now, and working with both elementary school kids and middle school kids made me kind of question my ability to manage a classroom. So they're extremely challenging to handle, particularly the middle school age. The fourth graders were a little more well-behaved. The other thing that happened is a funny anecdote, because I introduced the microbiome at the beginning of the class. I suggested that microbes are useful in the world because they detoxify things like wastewater. And at that time, this young girl realized that animals and even people poop in the ocean. And she said, "I'll never go into the ocean again." The problem is she was the daughter of one of my former colleagues. They're from Puerto Rico. So now that poor family has really complicated beach vacations because of my class. So that's all I have. I thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to take a question. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Mihai, for this game. I have one question here in the quick Q&A. Marcela Davila, wondering if you have considered adding different languages, mimicking different species.
Oh, that's a great question. No, we haven't thought of doing that. I think, yeah, I think it would be interesting to see. I mean, I think one interesting thing would be to use languages that are fairly similar. I mean, with different species, part of the problem is that that you have things that are kind of the same, but not quite. And I think I'll have to think about maybe using a Creole or something like that together with another language might make it work.
Thank you. The next question from Fawaz Dabagi. Also, have you considered adding mistakes in the sentences to actually show that sequencers make mistakes and others is a big problem?
Yeah, I have considered that. So far in this initial introduction, we didn't know how well it's going to work, so we stuck with the most simple solution. So this was last year's class. We'd like to try to see if we can introduce errors, and part of the challenge is getting the timing right. So this whole exercise that I told you took a full hour with the students, right? I don't want. It's very possible that introducing errors might take a lot longer, so perhaps in a slightly different setting. But that's something I'm trying to figure out how to expand. Also, how to expand to different phrases and so on. Maybe you should write our own phrases, I guess. That's a great question.
Thank you. To see next question. Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. Can you tell about how you initiated this course? Did you get a fund? I'm so inspired.
No, we didn't get a fund. So it all started because of Maryland Day. So everybody on campus has wonderful experiences. You can play with robots and stuff like that. And I always felt kind of not adequate, not being able to help to participate in that experience, because we do a lot of, analyzing sequencing data and running genome assemblies. That's not exciting to the students. So we thought together with the students in the lab, we tried to brainstorm about ideas of what we could do in a public setting, and we came up with this idea. So that's how it all started.
The next question from Jan Grau. More of a suggestion. We do a similar class and have an additional example with direct repeats. Identical words multiply in succession. It's written German example, unfortunately, but that works well to show students that this can't be resolved easily by short fragments and collapses into a short assembly.
Yeah, that's a wonderful suggestion. I realized there's all the single ladies by Beyonce has this structure, so I think that could be a useful thing to try out and see what the students come up with. That's a great recommendation, Jan.
Thank you, man. How big your class is? Like you said, like the duration is you're aiming for 1 hour. How many students do you take?
There's roughly about 30, I think, in our room.
Mm-hmm.